There are a lot of DAWs out there and they all have their own unique workflow, but how do you make it work for you? That is what we're sort of looking at today. Hey, I'm Steve from Command Shift New. MIDI is pretty much in every DAW, but the way that it looks, the way that it acts, the way that we can use it does differ from DAW to DAW. What we really need to work out is how is it going to work and benefit us. The problem with MIDI is often you spend a lot of time programming it and fixing it and changing things, but understanding how you can wrap all this up into a much more efficient workflow is going to make your life a lot easier, trust me. You can unlock a new type of way of recording MIDI and using MIDI in your DAW. The way that Logic handles MIDI information, it can change depending on how we want to use it. So I want to show you how I change from the standard overlapping and merge features and use Create Track instead. It's a really cool feature. It's something that you don't normally think about. If you're diving into preference lists, maybe you might find it and you might ask yourself what this is about. Maybe that's why you're here watching this video, because you've Googled it and this has come up. I don't know. But this is something that, to me, has really improved my workflow. My workflow has gone through leaps and bounds as a result of this. And my students love it as well. I'm a music lecturer. I pass this to my students all the time. They love these sorts of tips. So hopefully you get something out of this too. Let's hit the desk and check it out. All right. Let's get into it. So essentially the way that Logic normally sets up these MIDI recording functions is through Logic Pro, into preferences, into recording. You actually have recording options for both MIDI and for audio, the way that you want data to be sort of handled or the audio files to be handled. So the MIDI normally by default, when cycle off is usually set to something called overlap and cycle on merge. That's usually how it's set up by default. Actually, I think from 10.6 or so in Logic, it might have been create take folder. You can do take folders of MIDI just like you can with take folders of audio. It's sort of useful, and it can be, but I think there's a better way, and that's what I want to show you today. To begin with though, let's take a look at the default sort of modes, or the kind of common modes, as it were. I've got a simple sort of drum track here. It's nothing sort of fancy, it's just a contact instrument, studio drummer. It's sort of their default drummer. Quite a nice sound. I quite like them, they're not too bad. I'm just playing on a Native Instruments machiner, by the way, just in case you're wondering what's going on down here. I am actually just tapping some stuff down here. All right, so with these MIDI tracks, what I want to do is I want to record a kick, drum and snare pattern and then record a hi-hat over the top. Now let's take a look at what that would look like with cycle mode off, with the MIDI record function of overlap on at the moment. All right, nothing special, all good. Let's now record some hi-hats over the top. Okay, so immediately you may notice this going on. It looks sort of like there's only one MIDI information set of notes there, the kick and snare pattern. When I open up the MIDI editor, just E on my keyboard or double click on this region, you can see both of them, but it's only showing one. And that's because one is actually being hidden by the other. They're in two separate regions. Region being this green section here. Oh, there you go. As soon as I clicked off it, you can actually now see the other region. Maybe if I select both of them, yeah, so click and a drag, I can select both of them. But you can see I can't see more than one at a time. And that's because they're overlapped. If I drag this one out of the way, I can see it now. And I can see just the kick and snare pattern. Here's the thing. They were both playing together before, but now if I try and drag and move this one back to where it was and hit play, what's happened is I've erased the kick and the snare pattern because I've moved it away and then dragged over the top. Normally when you drag a region over another region in Logic, it erases what's underneath that region. That's a huge problem when doing something like this. So let's get rid of all that. Let's take a look at the kind of other default mode, the cycle mode, merging everything together. What I mean by cycle mode is if I press C on the keyboard or I select up the top here, the cycle mode, or indeed anywhere on this cycle section, it's repeating the section. So it's playing it through to the end, then going back to the start, playing again. Pretty standard indoors, but when this mode is engaged, what it is going to do is record loop over and over again. It's going to record over the top of what's already there. And we have it set to merge, which means anything that I record is going to merge over the top. Now what I'm going to try and do, I'm not the world's greatest finger drummer, but I'm going to try and play the kick and snare, and then I'm going to play the hi-hat over the top of it, some sort of pattern, and then have a look and see how it works out. All right, so pretty shabby by all standards. I'm definitely not the world's greatest drummer. But essentially what I've got here now is a bunch of MIDI regions that are all collapsed into the single region. I can quantize them all if I want. You never want to quantize to 100 strength, but that's a conversation for another time. Let's have a listen. It's not too bad. It's not the best, but it's not too bad. The thing is, it allows you to control this whole region block. Like I'm just dragging up some automation here, the note velocity, just to help kind of with those hi-hat hits in particular. But I really haven't got a lot of control. The problem is with this is that everything is together, and sometimes you want to edit one thing over the other. We quantize the whole lot, but maybe you want to quantize just the hi-hats. You don't necessarily want to merge the two. Often a way around this is you would sort of duplicate the track. That's just Command D on my keyboard, or the duplicate button up the top here. And now if I open my mixer, X on the keyboard, we can see that we've got two separate tracks, and we can see in the track workspace up here, two separate tracks as well. Good solution, but what it's actually going to be doing is chewing up your CPU and RAM a little bit. It's having to load two separate instances. One contact drummer here, one contact drummer over there. That means double the samples are being processed. Double the processing power is essentially required. Not ideal, particularly as we start to layer it up. In this situation, it's not too bad. There's only two tracks. There's not really much to worry about. But as your session grows and develops, it's going to become quite complex. Chewing up a lot more CPU, huge session, this is going to be particularly problematic, particularly if you want to break it up into kick drum, snare drum, hi-hat, crash cymbal, cowbell, splash cymbal, I don't know, jingle bells, whatever you've got. Essentially, it's going to create a lot of extra tracks for you. You're not going to want that. Trust me on that one. All right, I'm going to remove this block, and I'm going to show you my favorite way to record MIDI. This to me makes so much sense, and I'm going to show you why. It incredibly speeds up my workflow and offers a lot of flexibility. There is a bit of manual steps that you have to take. There's a few kind of limitations to this, but I think this might help you out. If I jump into Logic Pro Preferences, Recording again, and I head into, I'm going to do this while cycle mode is off, and I'm going to do a Create Track option. This is, to me, a game changer. It's probably been around for a while, but to me, it's awesome. All right, let's record the same kick and snare pattern, and then record the hi-hat afterwards and see what happens. Not very realistic hitting those two hi-hats at the same time as those two snares, but you know what, we'll roll with it. All right, so now what's happened is it has created a second track. It seems like it's done the same as the duplicating track that I just did. However, there is a crucial difference. If I open up the mixer, we're not seeing two separate tracks. Okay, what we're actually seeing here is the same track in the mixer, the same instrument, the same automation, the same data, the same mixing section, the same solo, mute buttons, the whole shebang. What we're looking at in the track workspace, that's this section up the top here, is we are looking at two tracks that both feed information into the single instrument track. Wrap your head around that one for a little bit. Essentially, there are two tracks feeding one instrument, and we're only seeing one instrument in the mixer because that's the only track that's actually there. This is sort of like, this second track here is sort of like a ghost track with another queue of information ready to go. The reason this works is that MIDI is quite different from audio. If you're not too sure, essentially what MIDI is data. It's not music, it's not even sound, it's just instructions. MIDI is simply a message or a language that the virtual instruments you use can make sense of. When I hit a note on a keyboard controller or on some pads or change a dial or something, MIDI is just the language that keyboard uses to communicate to my computer, to my software instrument, and tell it what to do. So because it's just data, essentially we can create lots of these data tracks that all feed into a single instrument. So that way, when the hi-hat is playing and when the kick drum and snare is playing, it's all feeding into the one. Now the benefit here is that I thought the kick drum and snare was quite solid, but the hi-hats not so much. Let's open up the editor, E on your keyboard, highlight those, and let's quantize them. Let's maybe push them a little bit. I want them nice and straight in there. Okay, now I'm hearing that back and I'm like, oh, the kick and the snare is probably a bit out. Okay, that's actually sounding better. That's turning Steve finger drumming into something that's actually plausible and pleasant to hear, to be honest, because not how it originally was. It certainly wasn't pleasant to hear. But what I've been able to do there is treat things separately. I was able to grab my hi-hats and adjust all the automation or the note velocity down there nice and easily. I was able to just grab them, edit them, do what I wanted with them, and do it separately to the kick drum and the snare drum. Now, you're probably asking yourself, once I've got all these duplicate tracks, what do I do then? Do I always have to work in these separate regions? No, you can join them together. If I grab those two, Command J on the keyboard, I can join the two together. And now I've got all of my MIDI information in there, all together now as one single block. And when I move that block around, unlike when I had overlapping, it's not leaving half of it behind and it's not going to destroy the half of it once I move it back. It's all going to be nice and consistent, nice and easy. Now you're probably asking yourself, well, what are we going to do with all these separate tracks? The great thing is these two, one of them's a primary track as long as there's one in existence. The others are just ghosts or aliases of the original track. So I just select it, make sure I've got no regions on that track. Once I know for sure, backspace or delete key, just get rid of it. And you've still got the individual track, you've still got it in the mixer, and it's nice and easy. There are a lot of positives to this. Main thing is workflow, being able to treat things separately, then join them together when you're ready. Let me give you another example. Often when I'm working in film score, I'm working with orchestral instruments. Here's some violins, for example. Lovely, beautiful patch by Spitfire. I'm obviously not sponsored by any of these people, but I'm just using what I've got. Okay, I've got basically a string patch here, lovely violins. What I'm gonna wanna do is I'm gonna wanna record one part of my violins, and then what will typically happen is you'll then wanna, extend that section, move ahead with it. Possibly this is working on a film score project and you've filled in one gap, filled in another gap, and now you're connecting something in the middle. Whatever you're writing, you can imagine if you had it in merge, everything's just gonna get jumbled together. What if you don't like that bit in the middle, then you've got to delete it and grab notes. It's a bit of a mess. So watch this. If I do a recording now, just with a simple sort of passage, let's record something. Okay, so something nice and simple there. Beautiful sort of string library. I love this sound, opening it up and creating something really unique. Beautiful section. Wanting to extend that a little bit further now. I want to add it on to this section. Now, if I was to hit record, do a count in, if I play even the slightest bit early, it is going to join it with this region because I've played that note a little bit early. Create track. That is the answer. Because watch this, if I hit record, it's gonna go back and it's just gonna take care of it for me. It's gonna create a separate track. Let's go. There we have it, 2 separate tracks. The beauty of this, the absolute magic of this is that let's say I then have another section after that and I'm like, I don't like this middle section. Maybe I want to record something different. I could select that block, Control M on my keyboard will mute just that block. And now I don't have to interfere with that. I can just record over the top, play something new, I don't have to worry about it. And then I can audition which parts I like. Maybe I want to record something slightly different there. Maybe I like that better. I don't know, really. They both sound all right. It's just improvisation after all. But what this allows me to do is I've just muted that section and now I've created something different. I'm experimenting a little bit, which is just fantastic. Now, there are some limitations to this, particularly when you're using MIDI control changes. Those continuous control changes are going to be a little bit of a problem. The only reason really is that you're basically only using one instrument. If I was to duplicate these 2 tracks, I'd have 2 separate MIDI channels talking to 2 separate instruments. So you can see down here where I've got my MIDI information going up on one, my CC information going down on another, that means those 2 are going to be fighting. They're the same channel. They're going to be fighting for this instrument. So as I play one set, for instance, you can hear that little sort of effect, and that's because as one is being moved down, another is being moved up, and it's constantly jumping between the 2 because the 2 are pulling against each other. So that is a bit of a problem. But it means that once you do bring these 2 down and you're happy with what you've got, you can just join these together. And then when you open it up, you can see in the MIDI channels where the problem area is. And I just use the pencil tool, come in here and just shape it to how I wanted it. Let's do the other side as well, because I've got a couple of channels there, and voila. Beautiful sections stitched together very easily after just auditioning different takes, different ideas. Wonderful way to increase your workflow. All right, so valid question, who gives, right? Like, why spend so much time, Steve, going through all of this? Well, the reason really comes down to workflow. If you can master your workflow, you are going to end up writing so much more efficiently. I'm not talking about speed. I think creativity always has a sense of pacing that's unique to individuals. Others might write faster than us. Some of us might write a little bit slower, and that's okay. But you do have control over efficiency and the way that you pursue creative ideas, if that makes sense. Essentially, you are in control of how you tailor your DAW, your environment, your setup to work for you. So if you can find these little tricks that maybe make it a little bit more helpful, that will make your composing journey a lot smoother. Honing your workflow is just really one of those priorities that sometimes slips our mind, but it's so important because it will make things a lot easier for you in the future. So cheers for staying with me for this entire video. I hope you'll be able to use it. It might just save you a little bit of time. Let me know in the comments if it did. I would love to hear these sorts of stories. So like and subscribe. I will catch you next time.